The year is 1947. You're 15 years old, a Bedouin shepherd in the Judean desert, and you've lost a goat. The cliffs above the Dead Sea are honeycombed with caves, dark openings in the limestone, most of them empty, some of them deep. You've passed them 100 times. But today, searching for that stray animal, you notice one you haven't seen before. A narrow opening, high on the cliff face. You pick up a stone. You throw it into the darkness. And you hear something you don't expect. Not the dull thud of rock hitting rock. A sharp, hollow sound. Pottery. Shattering. You don't know it yet, but that sound is about to change everything we understand about the Bible. About how ancient texts survived. About whether the words people have been reading for 2,000 years are the same words that were written down in the beginning. This isn't legend. This isn't metaphor. The evidence is still there. The cave is still there. The scrolls that teenager found are still there, displayed in a museum in Jerusalem, available to anyone who wants to see them. And the question those scrolls answered is one that had haunted scholars for centuries. Can we trust that the Bible we read today is the same Bible that existed 2,000 years ago? You're going to see the evidence for yourself. I'll show you the oldest complete book of the Bible ever found, a scroll so well preserved you can still read every word. You'll learn how these texts went from a classified ad in the Wall Street Journal to a clandestine purchase at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. You'll discover what happened when scientists compared these 2,000-year-old manuscripts to the versions we use today, and why the results stunned everyone. And I'll show you the one scroll that isn't scripture at all. It's a treasure map. 64 locations, over $1 billion in gold and silver. Still unfound. Welcome to History Excavated. To understand what Muhammad ad-Dib found in that cave, you need to understand what he didn't find. He didn't find ancient weapons. He didn't find gold coins or royal seals. He found jars. Tall, cylindrical clay jars with bowl-shaped lids, standing upright in the darkness like they were waiting for someone. Most of them were empty. But when he reached into one, his hand closed around something wrapped in linen cloth. Old, brittle, rolled tight. He had no idea what it was. Neither did his cousins Juma and Khalil when he showed them. They were shepherds, not scholars. They knew the scrolls were old. They knew old things sometimes had value. So they did what anyone would do. They tried to sell them. The first sale tells you everything about how little anyone understood what had been found. 3 scrolls, 7 Jordanian pounds. That's roughly $28 for all 3 combined, about $9 each. Today, a single Dead Sea Scroll fragment sells for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Complete scrolls are essentially priceless. But in 1947, these teenagers sold 3 of them for the price of a decent pair of shoes. The scrolls passed through the hands of antiquities dealers in Bethlehem. A cobbler named Khalil Iskander Shaheen, everyone called him Kondo, became the middleman. He sold 4 scrolls to the Syrian Orthodox Archbishop of Jerusalem, Athanasius Yeshu Samuel, for about $100. But here's where the story splits. Because at the same time those scrolls were being sold to the Archbishop, a Hebrew University professor named Eleazar Sukenik heard rumors about ancient manuscripts. On November 23, 1947, Sukenik met an Armenian dealer at a military checkpoint. Through a barbed wire fence, Jerusalem was under British curfew, divided by checkpoints and barriers, the dealer showed him a fragment. Sukenik's diary records the moment. My hands shook as I started to unwrap one of them. I read a few sentences. It was written in beautiful biblical Hebrew. The language was like that of the Psalms, but the text was unknown to me. 6 days later, on November 29, 1947, the very day the United Nations voted to partition Palestine, the day that would lead to Israel's independence and decades of conflict, Sukenik traveled to Bethlehem. He bought 3 scrolls for $324. Think about that timing. The modern state of Israel is being born. The region is about to erupt into war. And a Jewish professor is sneaking into Arab Bethlehem to buy ancient Hebrew manuscripts from a Christian dealer. The scrolls didn't care about modern politics. They had been waiting in that cave for 2,000 years. They could wait a little longer. Archbishop Samuel had a problem. He'd taken his 4 scrolls to the United States in 1949, hoping to find a buyer. He exhibited them at the Library of Congress. He showed them to scholars. Everyone agreed they were extraordinary, but nobody would buy them. The issue was legal. Jordan claimed Samuel had smuggled the scrolls out illegally. Any institution that purchased them risked a lawsuit, an international incident, or both. For 5 years, the most important biblical manuscripts in existence sat in a safe deposit box, unsold. Then, on June 1, 1954, this ad appeared in the Wall Street Journal, buried in the classified section under Miscellaneous for Sale. The 4 Dead Sea Scrolls, biblical manuscripts dating back to at least 200 BC, are for sale. This would be an ideal gift to an educational or religious institution by an individual or group. It sounds like a joke, like someone trying to sell the Mona Lisa through Craigslist. But it was real, and it caught the attention of exactly the right person. Yigael Yadin was an Israeli archaeologist. He was also a former general, the son of Professor Sukenik, who had purchased those first 3 scrolls. He happened to be in New York on a lecture tour when the ad appeared. Yadin couldn't buy the scrolls openly. Israel and Jordan were technically at war. If Samuel knew he was selling to Israel, the deal would collapse. So Yadin arranged an elaborate deception. A banker named Sidney Estridge posed as the buyer. A professor named Harry Orlinsky authenticated the scrolls using the fake name Mr. Green. He'd been literally pulled off vacation by Yadin's phone call. The exchange happened at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel on July 1, 1954. The price? $250,000. In today's money, that's nearly $3 million. Each of the 4 scrolls flew to Israel on a separate plane, in case one crashed. Prime Minister Moshe Sharett announced the acquisition on February 13, 1955. Archbishop Samuel probably learned only then that he'd sold to Israel, and the IRS ruled the sale personal income, claiming a large portion in taxes. But Israel now had all 7 original scrolls: the complete Great Isaiah Scroll, the Community Rule, the War Scroll, the Habakkuk Commentary, the Thanksgiving Hymns, the Genesis Apocryphon, and fragments of a second Isaiah copy. 7 scrolls from 1 cave. There would be 10 more caves to come. Between 1947 and 1956, Bedouin treasure hunters and professional archaeologists raced each other through the cliffs above the Dead Sea. The Bedouin had the advantage of local knowledge and desperation. Scroll fragments meant money. The archaeologist had the advantage of systematic search methods and the resources of the Jordanian government. Sometimes the Bedouin found caves first. Sometimes the archaeologists did. Cave 4, discovered in August 1952, changed everything. It wasn't hidden. It was visible from the Qumran ruins below, carved into the marl terrace just a few hundred meters away. Bedouin found it first, and what they pulled out was staggering. Approximately 15,000 fragments from over 500 different texts. 90% of all Dead Sea Scroll material came from this single cave. But Cave 4 was different from Cave 1 in a crucial way. The scrolls in Cave 1 had been carefully stored in jars, wrapped in linen, preserved with obvious intention. The scrolls in Cave 4 were stacked on the floor. The entrance had been sealed with marlstone. It looked like a rushed job, like someone hiding their library as fast as possible before running. Cave 11, found in 1956, held the last major discoveries. The Temple Scroll, at nearly 9 meters, the longest scroll ever found. And the Great Psalms Scroll, containing the oldest copies of the worship songs that Jews and Christians still sing today. Then, silence. For 60 years, no new scroll caves. Until 2017. Archaeologists from Hebrew University announced Cave 12, the first new scroll cave discovered since 1956. What they found inside tells a tragic story. Storage jars, smashed. Scroll wrappings, empty. Leather straps that once bound manuscripts, lying loose on the floor. And hidden in a crevice, iron pickaxe heads from the 1950s. Looters had been there. Decades ago, someone had emptied Cave 12 and taken everything. The scrolls that were once stored there are somewhere in the world. In private collections, in museum basements, perhaps destroyed. We'll probably never know. But the empty jars prove something. There were more scrolls than we found. The 11 caves we know about aren't the whole story. You're standing in the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem. The building itself is a statement. A white dome, shaped like the lids of the jars the scrolls were found in, rising above a black basalt wall. Light against darkness. The sons of light against the sons of darkness. That's not poetry. That's theology. It comes directly from one of the scrolls. Inside, wrapped around a giant drum-shaped display, you see the great Isaiah scroll. 24 feet of parchment. 17 sheets of sheepskin sewn together. 54 columns of text in ancient Hebrew. Every single chapter of the book of Isaiah, all 66, complete and readable after 2,000 years. Carbon-14 dating places this scroll between 180 and 100 BCE. Handwriting analysis suggests around 125 BCE. That makes it over 1,000 years older than any Hebrew Bible manuscript that existed before 1947. Here's why that matters. Before the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest Hebrew Bible manuscripts dated to the 9th and 10th centuries CE, the Aleppo Codex, the Leningrad Codex. These medieval copies were the basis for every modern translation. But scholars had always wondered, how much had the text changed over the centuries? How many copying errors had accumulated? How different was the medieval Bible from the original? The Dead Sea Scrolls let us check. When researchers compared the Great Isaiah Scroll to the medieval Masoretic text, they found something remarkable. Word for word, the two versions matched more than 95% of the time. The 5% differences? Mostly spelling variations, scribal slips, minor phrasing differences. Not theological changes, not deliberate alterations. Just the kind of small errors you'd expect from 1,000 years of hand copying. Think about what that means. Generation after generation of scribes, copying these texts by hand, letter by letter, for a millennium. And they preserved it almost perfectly. But the scrolls revealed something else, too. Something more complicated. Not all the Dead Sea Scroll texts match the version we use today. Some scrolls align with the Greek Septuagint translation instead. Some match the Samaritan Pentateuch. The Jeremiah scroll from Cave 4 is significantly shorter than our modern version, and matches the Greek. Even Goliath's height differs. The Masoretic text says he was 6 cubits tall, over 9 feet. The Dead Sea Scrolls say 4 cubits, about 6 feet. Still big, not a giant. What the scrolls prove isn't that there was one perfect original text. They prove that multiple versions coexisted in antiquity. The scribes weren't preserving a single manuscript. They were preserving a tradition. And that tradition had variations. There's one scroll that doesn't fit. The copper scroll isn't made of parchment or papyrus. It's made of metal, 99% copper, rolled into 2 separate tubes. When it was found in Cave 3 on March 14, 1952, it was so corroded it couldn't be unrolled. Researchers had to send it to Manchester University, where a professor named H. Wright Baker cut it into 23 strips with a miniature circular saw. What they found inside wasn't scripture. It was an inventory. 64 entries. 64 hiding places, each one describing buried treasure. In the cistern courtyard, in the recess at the bottom, 900 talents. In the cave of the old washer's house, on the third terrace, 65 gold ingots. Under the corner of the southern portico at Zadok's tomb, a vessel of incense and a vessel of incense, and all the tithe money. The total amounts described in the copper scroll add up to approximately 4,600 talents of gold and silver. In modern terms, that's somewhere around 26 tons of gold and 65 tons of silver. Over $1 billion. Maybe much more. Is it real? Some scholars think it's fantasy, a folklore tradition about buried treasure, written down by dreamers. Others think it's the temple treasury, hidden before the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 CE. The scroll's language is different from the other Dead Sea Scrolls, a form of Hebrew closer to the Mishnah, more practical, less literary. It reads like a real inventory written by someone who actually knew where things were buried. The problem is the directions. They're deliberately vague. In the cave that is next to the fountain belonging to the house of Hakos. But which fountain? Which house? The locations assume knowledge that the writer had, but we don't. Multiple expeditions have searched for the copper scroll treasure. John Allegro dug in 1959 and 1960. Others followed. None found anything. The copper scroll is now in the Jordan Museum in Amman, one of the few Dead Sea Scrolls not held by Israel. The treasure, if it exists, is still in the ground. The ruins at Qumran sit on a plateau above the Dead Sea, about a mile from the caves. You can visit them today. You'll see the remains of a water system, an aqueduct, channeling winter flash floods into a series of cisterns and pools. You'll see ritual baths, more than any normal settlement would need. You'll see a cemetery with over 1,000 graves, almost all of them adult males, almost all of them oriented north-south, with a uniformity found nowhere else in ancient Judea. And you'll see evidence of fire, iron arrowheads embedded in walls, a thick layer of black ash, glass melted by intense heat, coins dating to the 2nd and 3rd years of the Jewish revolt against Rome, 67 and 68 CE. The Romans destroyed Qumran, probably in the summer of 68 CE, 2 years before they burned Jerusalem, 5 years before they took Masada. The 10th Legion, commanded by Marcus Ulpius Traianus, swept through the Jordan Valley on their way south. Whoever lived at Qumran saw them coming. The evidence suggests 2 different responses. In Cave 1, scrolls were carefully placed in jars, wrapped in linen, stored with obvious care, like someone planning to come back. In Cave 4, scrolls were shoved onto the floor and the entrance sealed with rocks, like someone who had minutes, not hours. Ancient sources describe a Jewish sect called the Essenes, who lived near the Dead Sea. Josephus says there were about 4,000 of them. They lived communally, shared all property, wore white, and followed strict purity laws. Pliny the Elder places them on the western shore of the Dead Sea, above Ein Gedi, exactly where Qumran sits. Most scholars identify the Qumran community with the Essenes, or a group closely related to them. The community rule scroll describes their organization: a 3-year initiation process, communal meals, confession of sins, strict hierarchy. Punishments included 30 days of reduced food rations for interrupting another member, 10 days for falling asleep during assembly, permanent expulsion for betraying the community to outsiders. These people took their texts seriously. When the Romans came, they hid their entire library in the cliffs rather than let it burn. And then they were gone. For 40 years, almost no one could see the scrolls. In 1952, the Jordanian government assembled an international team of 7 scholars to study and publish the Cave 4 fragments. All 7 were Western Christians. No Jews were included. Jordan and Israel were enemies. The team was led by Father Roland Deveau of the École Biblique in Jerusalem. They worked slowly, very slowly. By 1991, only about 100 of the 500 scrolls assigned to them had been published. A concordance, basically an index of every word in every scroll, had been completed in the late 1950s, but wasn't made available to other scholars until 1989. And even then, only to select researchers who had the right connections. Herschel Shanks, editor of Biblical Archaeology Review, led a public campaign against what he called the Scroll Cartel. Scholars who had devoted their careers to these texts were denied access. Graduate students couldn't study them. The public, who had paid for excavations through museum admissions and book purchases, couldn't see what their money had uncovered. The monopoly broke on September 22, 1991. William Moffett, director of the Huntington Library in California, announced that his institution held 3,000 master photographic negatives of the scrolls. A philanthropist named Elizabeth Hay Bechtel had commissioned the photographs and donated them to the library with no access restrictions. Moffett opened the vault. The original scroll team was furious. John Strugnell called it piracy. But Israel, which had controlled the scrolls since capturing East Jerusalem in 1967, took a different position. The Israeli Antiquities Authority declared that scholarship should be open. Emmanuel Tove, appointed editor-in-chief in 1990, transformed the project. He expanded the team to over 50 scholars. Between 1990 and 2009, they published 32 volumes. The final volume appeared in 2009, 57 years after the original team was assembled. Today, you can see high-resolution images of every scroll online, free, through the Israel Museum's Leon Levy Dead Sea Scrolls digital library. The secrets are out. In 2017, the Museum of the Bible opened in Washington, D.C. Among its prize exhibits, 16 fragments of Dead Sea Scrolls, purchased by Hobby Lobby president Steve Green for millions of dollars. By 2020, investigators had confirmed that all 16 were modern forgeries. The forgers were clever. They used ancient leather, probably from Roman-era shoes or sandals, so the material would pass radiocarbon dating. They applied ink that looked ancient. They scattered modern table salt to mimic Dead Sea mineral deposits. They coated the fragments with amber-colored animal glue to match authentic scroll appearance. But they made mistakes. The ink bled over broken edges, proving it was applied after the leather cracked. Letters followed creases and tears in the material, showing the writing happened after the leather had aged and dried. And in one fragment, a Greek letter alpha appeared where a 1930s reference Hebrew Bible used alpha for footnotes, proving the forgers had copied from a modern printed source. Scholars now estimate that as many as 70 forged fragments entered the antiquities market after 2002. Collectors and institutions spent $35 to $45 million on fakes. The lesson is brutal. The demand for Dead Sea Scroll material is so intense that criminals will manufacture fake ancient manuscripts to meet it. And for years, they succeeded. Let's stack what we know. The caves are real. You can visit Qumran today, walk among the ruins, see the cliff faces where the scrolls were hidden. The scrolls are real. 981 manuscripts, approximately 25,000 fragments, displayed in museums in Jerusalem and Amman, photographed in high resolution and available online. The dating is real. Carbon-14 tests from laboratories in Zurich, Arizona, and the Netherlands all confirm dates between 250 BCE and 68 CE. Paleographic analysis of handwriting styles matches the scientific dating. The textual comparison is real. The Great Isaiah Scroll matches the medieval Masoretic text with over 95% accuracy across a 1,000-year gap. And the destruction is real. Arrowheads in walls, ash layers, melted glass, coins from the Jewish revolt. The Romans came, the community hid their books, and then silence, for 2,000 years. A teenager throwing stones into a cave heard pottery shatter. That sound echoed across decades of scholarship, controversy, forgery, and revelation. What he found in that darkness answered questions that had troubled believers and skeptics alike. Can we trust that ancient texts survived intact? The answer, written in faded ink on crumbling parchment, is remarkable. Generation after generation of scribes, copying by hand, working by oil lamp, treating every letter as sacred. They preserved these words with almost perfect accuracy. The scrolls prove it. The evidence isn't behind glass. You can see the caves. You can read the texts online. You can walk through the ruins at Qumran and stand where the scribes stood, looking out at the Dead Sea, waiting for the Romans. That's the thing about archaeology. Sometimes history leaves receipts, and sometimes those receipts wait 2,000 years for a shepherd boy to find them.